Put the food back, ma'am. Marla Voss pulled the tray away as Eleanor Whitmore's fingers closed around the paper cup of tea. Daniel Hayes looked at the 2 round halves of bread on his last breakfast, separated them with one calloused hand, and pushed one half across the table. She didn't take it, he said. I gave it. At the far end of the cafeteria, hospital director Thomas Whitmore saw the silver oak pin beneath Eleanor's collar, and stood so quickly his chair screamed across the tile. 3 hours earlier, Daniel had awakened before his alarm in the narrow apartment he shared with his 10-year-old son. The heating vent clicked without producing much warmth, and the refrigerator motor hummed behind a door holding milk, 2 apples, and a paper bag marked with Noah's name. Daniel packed the apples into his son's lunch, left the milk for breakfast, and filled his own dented metal lunchbox with nothing but a folded napkin. His toolbox waited beside the door, its leather handle polished smooth by years of use. On the kitchen counter, Noah had left a note in uneven pencil. Dad, please eat today. Daniel folded it once and placed it behind the boys' school photograph inside the lunchbox lid. By 7, the fluorescent lights of Whitmore Memorial had washed every hallway the same pale color. The air smelled of disinfectant, burnt coffee, and the faint machine oil clinging to Daniel's blue-gray work shirt. He repaired a loose handrail outside radiology, reset a flickering exit sign, and stopped long enough to raise a wheelchair footrest for a patient whose blanket kept catching underneath it. No one applauded. Most people never noticed. That was how Daniel preferred kindness, quiet enough that the person receiving it did not have to feel observed. His cafeteria voucher covered 1 breakfast plate, the cheapest available. He carried it past the register with his scratched employee badge turned toward the scanner. 2 bread rounds sat beside powdered eggs, their edges touching like a single circle. Near the windows, an elderly woman in a worn beige coat counted coins beside a trembling cup of tea. Marla stood across from her in a pressed navy blazer, smiling with the careful patience of someone who wanted witnesses to believe she was being compassionate. I don't want to embarrass you, she said, but policies protect everyone. Eleanor was short $2.17. Behind her, an administrative employee lifted a coffee from the counter and walked away without scanning anything. Marla saw it. Her smile never changed. Daniel had taken 1 step toward an empty table when Marla caught the edge of Eleanor's tray. The plastic scraped across the laminate. Eleanor's shoulders folded inward, but she did not beg. She only tightened both hands around the tea as if warmth were the last thing in the room she was still allowed to keep. Daniel set down his toolbox. He separated the bread, pushed half the meal toward her, and placed the tea closer to her fingers. Hunger doesn't become theft just because someone notices it. The security guard near the doors touched his radio. Marla's voice remained soft. Mr. Hayes, interfering with cafeteria procedure, may require a written incident report. At the far end of the room, Thomas Whitmore had risen from his chair. He did not move closer. He simply stared at the silver oak pin showing beneath Eleanor's collar, disbelief holding him in place. Then Marla reached for a blank incident form already resting beneath her clipboard, and Daniel saw the time printed across the top. 7:18 a.m., 3 minutes before Eleanor had ever touched the tray. Daniel kept his eyes on the time printed across the top of the incident form. 7:18 a.m. The cafeteria clock above the register read 7:22 now, and Eleanor had not touched the tray until after 7:21. Is there a problem? Marla asked. The time is wrong. The system fills that automatically. Her voice stayed polished, almost soothing. Behind her, the refrigerated display hummed beneath the fluorescent lights, and the smell of scorched coffee settled between them like something bitter no one wanted to name. Daniel held the paper by its dry corner while a brown stain from Eleanor's spilled tea slowly spread through the words non-compliant guest. Marla turned slightly toward the security guard. Mr. Brennan, please remain nearby. I believe we can resolve this without making anyone uncomfortable. The guard's hand fell away from his radio, but he did not leave. Eleanor began to rise. The uneven table shifted beneath her palm, and the cup tilted again. Daniel caught it before the hot tea reached her coat. then pulled the chair back into place with his boot. "You don't have to stand," he said. "I don't want you losing your job because of me. You're not the reason." "Mr. Hayes," Marla interrupted. "This is exactly the kind of escalation I'm trying to prevent." She spoke as though Daniel's calmness were another form of aggression. Two hospital employees waiting near the register glanced at his faded work shirt and scratched badge. One leaned toward the other and whispered, not quietly enough, "Maintenance thinks every rule is optional once they know where the breaker box is." Daniel heard it. His jaw tightened once, then relaxed. He did not look at them. Instead, he took a stack of napkins from the dispenser and gently dried the tea from Eleanor's fingers before wiping the table. Thomas Whitmore remained several yards away, one hand resting on the back of the chair he had pushed aside. He had not approached. His eyes moved from the silver oak pin beneath Eleanor's collar to the form in Daniel's hand, then to Marla's face. "What exactly happened?" he asked. Marla straightened. "A guest attempted to take food without completing payment. Mr. Hayes interfered with staff procedure and created confusion. She was short $2, Daniel said. "You were not asked to provide commentary," Marla replied. The words were gentle. The dismissal was not. She extended her hand for the form. Daniel did not give it back. "I was asked to sign it. And you may decline. We will simply note that. You can note that I declined. You can't note that she caused a disturbance when she didn't." Eleanor looked down at the tea-soaked sentence. The embroidered letters EW showed on the corner of the handkerchief beneath her cup, darkened where the liquid had reached them. Thomas noticed the initials, but recognition did not settle over his face. It only deepened the uncertainty there. Marla lowered her voice further. "Mr. Hayes, I understand that financial hardship can make these situations feel personal. But hospital policy cannot be rewritten according to one employee's emotions." Her gaze flicked briefly toward his empty metal lunchbox, then returned to his face. The implication was quiet and precise. A man who could barely afford breakfast was not qualified to judge how money should be managed. Daniel closed the lunchbox lid. Noah's photograph disappeared beneath the dented metal. "This isn't about my finances. Then please allow trained staff to handle it." "Trained to do what?" The question was not loud. That made it carry farther. For a moment, only the ice machine answered, dropping cubes into its bin with a hollow crack. Marla smiled again, but the muscles near her eyes had gone still. To preserve a safe, orderly environment for patients and visitors, Eleanor looked around the cafeteria. No one had been endangered. No one had shouted. The only thing out of order was the half tray of food sitting beyond the line Marla believed she controlled. An administrative assistant arrived with a second clipboard and asked Daniel for his employee number. When he began explaining the incorrect time, she cut him off. "We only document observable conduct. Then document the clock. That isn't relevant." It was relevant enough to print. Thomas's gaze rose to the cafeteria clock, then dropped to his wristwatch. The two matched. He looked toward the black dome camera mounted above the condiment station. Its red indicator was on, angled directly toward the table. "The footage will establish the sequence," he said. Marla answered too quickly. "That camera may not retain audio, and cafeteria recordings are routinely overwritten." Thomas turned toward her. "I asked about the sequence." A small silence opened. Marla adjusted the papers on her clipboard, aligning their edges with her thumb. Daniel watched the movement and saw a second incident form beneath the first. Then a third. Each carried the same printed phrase, "Non-compliant guest." He shifted the tea-stained page just enough to read the code in the lower corner. C14. The form underneath bore the same code, already dated from the previous week. "How many people have you written up with this form?" he asked. Marla's hand covered the stack. "That information is confidential." Daniel looked at Eleanor, then at the untouched half of his breakfast between them. "Their names may be confidential. The pattern isn't." Thomas's attention moved back to the papers, and for the first time, he was no longer studying Eleanor's face. He was studying Marla's hand. Beneath her palm, The corner of another C-14 form showed a timestamp printed before the cafeteria had even opened. Thomas kept his eyes on the corner of the C-14 form showing beneath Marla's palm. The timestamp read 6:42 a.m., nearly 20 minutes before the cafeteria doors had opened. Marla slid the stack beneath her clipboard with the same calm expression she had used from the beginning. "Those are unrelated records," she said. "Then they should be easy to explain," Daniel replied. "This is not the place." The words came quickly. The room slowed around them. Fluorescent light shone across the wet edge of Eleanor's handkerchief, the scratched surface of Daniel's toolbox, and the two halves of bread cooling on the tray between them. Then Eleanor's paper cup gave a faint wooden tap against the table, once, twice, again, because the short metal leg beneath her side could no longer hold steady. Daniel looked down before anyone else did. He set the tea-stained form beside his lunchbox, knelt on the tile, and opened the old toolbox. The hinges made a tired squeak. Inside lay wire cutters, a voltage tester, a roll of black tape, 2 screwdrivers, and a small envelope of rubber shims he saved from previous repairs because small things often failed before anyone bothered to report them. "Mr. Hayes," Marla said, "facilities requests must be entered through the proper channel." Daniel pressed one palm against the underside of the table and felt the loose mounting plate shift. "Someone's holding hot tea. The table has been like that for months. That doesn't make it safe." He did not look up. He slid a rubber shim beneath the short leg, tightened the plate with a quarter turn, then tested the tabletop with both hands. The cup stopped trembling. Eleanor watched him wipe a thin line of dust from the rim of the table with his sleeve before placing the tea back within reach. "There," he said. "You shouldn't have had to hold it so tight." Marla gave a small breath through her nose, almost a laugh. "You have a remarkable talent for turning minor inconveniences into moral emergencies." Daniel closed the toolbox. "No, ma'am. I fix minor things before they become emergencies." Near the window, an elderly patient in a hospital gown dropped his spoon. It struck the floor with a bright metallic sound and slid beneath a chair. The man looked toward the crowded counter, then lowered his eyes, embarrassed by the effort it would take to ask someone for help. Daniel crossed the room, retrieved the spoon, carried it to the dish station, and returned with a clean one wrapped in a napkin. He adjusted the man's tray so the oatmeal sat closer to his stronger hand. "Thank you," the patient whispered. Daniel nodded once and walked back without checking whether Thomas had noticed. Thomas had. That was what unsettled him. Daniel did not perform kindness toward the most important person in the room. He offered it in every direction, without rank, without calculation, as if dignity were part of routine maintenance. Daniel's phone vibrated against the metal lunchbox. The sound was small, but in the quiet around the table it seemed louder. He glanced at the screen. Noah's message appeared beneath a cartoon rocket icon. "Dad, please eat breakfast today." Daniel read it once. The memory behind it arrived without drama. The evenings when Noah watched him push food around a plate after his wife died. The mornings when the boy counted the slices of bread without admitting he was counting. Daniel locked the phone and placed it face down. Eleanor had seen enough. "That was your son?" she asked. "Yeah. He thinks you haven't eaten. Kids worry." She looked at the half of the breakfast still on Daniel's side. "And are they usually wrong?" Daniel did not answer. Instead, he broke his remaining bread into 2 uneven pieces and placed the larger one on Eleanor's napkin. "I'm fine." "That is not what I asked. It's what I've got." There was no self-pity in his voice, only a boundary. He would give her food, but he would not make her carry the weight of his life in exchange. Eleanor touched the edge of the bread without lifting it. Her eyes moved to the dented lunchbox. When Daniel opened it to return his phone, the photograph inside the lid caught the light. Noah in a red school sweatshirt, smiling with one front tooth missing. Behind the photograph was the folded pencil note Daniel had saved that morning. Eleanor looked away before he could feel observed. Marla did not. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly, "generosity is admirable, but this hospital cannot operate on private gestures. Her gaze settled on his empty lunchbox. Especially from employees who may not fully understand the financial pressures involved. Daniel shut the lid. I understand when someone is hungry. That is not the same as understanding policy. No, he looked at Eleanor's shaking hands, now steadier around the cup. It's more immediate. Marla turned toward Thomas, inviting him into the version of events she preferred. Director Whitmore, I'm sure you agree that allowing staff members to override payment procedures creates confusion. Thomas did not answer. His attention had moved to the paper cup. Beneath the brown tea stain and the fresh price sticker, faded green lettering curved around the cardboard, Whitmore Community Meal Fund. Eleanor slowly rotated the cup between her palms. A newer label had been placed over the original program code, but one corner had lifted in the heat, exposing 3 old digits beneath it. Her expression changed, not with surprise, but recognition. This fund still exists, she said. Marla responded before Thomas could ask. The name remains on old inventory. The program itself was discontinued years ago. Eleanor ran her thumb across the cup. Was it? Marla's smile returned. I'm certain. Daniel reached for a clean napkin and gently wiped the tea from the faded lettering. He did not know why the name mattered. He only noticed that the cup was not old. The manufacturer's date printed near the bottom was less than 4 months earlier. Thomas saw it at the same moment. The room did not fall silent. Not yet. But something in his face tightened as Eleanor lifted the cup toward the light and read aloud the program code Marla had claimed no longer existed. Thomas took the paper cup from Eleanor only after she loosened her grip. The faded green words curved beneath the fresh price label, Whitmore Community Meal Fund. Near the bottom, in ink too small to notice from across the table, the manufacturer's date showed the cup had been produced 4 months earlier. You said this was old inventory, Thomas said. Marla did not blink. Old branding can remain in circulation for years. On a new cup? Daniel asked. 3 short sentences passed between them. Then the cafeteria seemed to widen around the table. The fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead. The ice machine released another hollow crash, and the smell of tea mingled with disinfectant and overcooked eggs. Marla reached for the cup. This is exactly how confusion starts. A printed logo is not proof that a program remains active. Eleanor drew the cup back before Marla's fingers could close around it. Her movement was small, but Thomas noticed how quickly Marla had tried to remove the object from view. The code beneath the label, he said. What does it identify? Marla looked at the peeled corner. Probably an obsolete inventory number. Probably, Thomas repeated. His tone was not hostile. It was worse for Marla than hostility. It was precise. Daniel leaned closer without touching the cup. The old program code showed only 3 digits where the heat had lifted the sticker. He turned the tray slightly so the overhead light struck the cardboard at an angle. Beneath the adhesive, a faint line of green print continued around the cup. The label was placed over the code after printing, he said. That doesn't mean anything by itself, Marla answered. No, Daniel said, but it means someone wanted the code covered. Marla's smile thinned. Mr. Hayes, you repair doors and wiring. You are not qualified to interpret procurement practices. Daniel looked at the cup, not at her. I didn't interpret it. I described what I could see. Thomas's eyes stayed on him for a moment. There was still doubt there. Daniel was a maintenance technician who had inserted himself into a cafeteria dispute, refused to sign an incident report, and now appeared to be examining hospital inventory as though he belonged in an audit. On paper, Marla's explanation was reasonable. Old designs were reused. Labels changed. Employees misunderstood systems outside their departments. Yet Daniel's questions were narrow, and Marla's answers kept widening. A soft chime sounded through the ceiling speakers. Eleanor's head lifted before anyone else reacted. 2 clear notes, a pause, then 1 lower tone. Her fingers tightened around the cup. Mercy Wing still uses that old chime, she murmured. Thomas looked toward her. What did you call it? Eleanor seemed to realize she had spoken aloud. The pediatric corridor. It hasn't been called Mercy Wing in over 20 years. Marla seized the opening. The hospital's history is publicly available. There are articles, donor brochures, anniversary displays. Eleanor looked past them toward the hallway leading to pediatrics. The old bronze bell was mounted beside the east entrance, above a wooden plaque with the names of the first 12 nurses. A nurse waiting near the coffee station turned sharply. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pinned beneath a surgical cap and a badge that read Patricia Lane, RN. The bell was removed during the 2003 renovation, she said. The plaque went into storage. Marla folded her arms. Again, that information may be available somewhere. Patricia frowned. The plaque was never photographed for the public archive. It was damaged before the move. Eleanor's gaze stayed on the corridor. The crack ran through the left corner. Someone tried to repair it with dark resin, but the color never matched. Patricia's expression changed. Not belief, not yet, but the careful resistance of someone whose memory had just been touched by another memory too exact to dismiss. Thomas stepped closer to Eleanor. How do you know that? She lowered her eyes to the paper cup. I remember it. From when? From before people started calling every old thing a story. Marla gave a controlled sigh. Director Whitmore, with respect, this conversation is becoming inappropriate. We have an unidentified visitor making unverifiable claims and an employee encouraging her. She had called Eleanor a guest before, then a non-compliant guest. Now, without being asked, she had used the word unidentified. Daniel noticed. So did Thomas. Eleanor reached for her handkerchief, and the loose silver pin at her collar shifted. It caught against the fabric, then tilted downward as though it might fall. Daniel saw the bent clasp. May I? He asked. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. He removed the pin carefully and placed it on the dry corner of the tray beside the two halves of bread. Up close, the oak tree had been worked in fine silver lines, its roots spreading beneath the trunk. The clasp was old, but the metal was clean where it had rubbed against fabric for years. Daniel opened his toolbox, selected a pair of narrow pliers, and adjusted the bent catch without scratching the surface. He did not ask what the pin was worth. He did not ask why Marla had gone still. When he turned it over to inspect the hinge, four small marks appeared beneath the clasp. 01-1958. There's a number, he said. Thomas's breath changed. Barely, but Eleanor heard it. Marla leaned forward. Commemorative pieces were sold during several fundraising campaigns. Thousands may exist. Thomas looked at her. Were they numbered? I believe some were. You believe? I would have to check. Daniel set the pin beneath the direct white light of the table lamp near the wall. The engraving was not stamped like modern merchandise. It had been cut by hand, the first digit deeper than the others. Eleanor reached for it, but Daniel paused before returning it. The clasp was repaired before, he said. A long time ago. Same tool marks on both sides. Eleanor looked at him with a sadness he could not place. My husband fixed it at this table, she said. The words landed softly. Thomas turned toward the table as though seeing it for the first time. The repaired leg, the wet handkerchief, the split bread, the silver oak resting between them. This table? He asked. Eleanor did not answer. Marla moved to stand between Thomas and the wall where an old black and white photograph hung above a brass plaque. Director, we should continue this privately. Her shoulder blocked part of the frame. Daniel shifted half a step, enough to see past her. In the photograph, a younger woman stood beside the hospital's original entrance, one hand resting on a bronze bell. At her collar was the same silver oak. Thomas raised his phone and photographed the number on the back of Eleanor's pin. He sent it to the hospital archives with a single request. Verify original issue records. No one spoke while the message left his screen. Eleanor accepted the repaired pin and fastened it inside her coat, hiding the oak once more. Then Thomas's phone vibrated. He looked down at the reply, and the color drained slowly from his face. The archive had found the record. Pin 01-1958 had never been sold, duplicated, or replaced, and it had been issued to only one person. Thomas read the archive message twice. PIN 01-1958 had been issued once, never duplicated, never replaced, and never released through a fundraising campaign. His thumb remained still against the phone screen. Who received it? Marla asked. The archive is confirming the original record, Thomas said. Then we should wait before drawing conclusions. We are waiting. Privately would be more appropriate. Her tone stayed measured, but one hand had tightened around the clipboard until the paper edges bent beneath her fingers. Across the cafeteria, the breakfast line had slowed. A spoon stopped halfway to someone's mouth. The wheels of a supply cart squeaked once and became still. Daniel saw the change in the room, but he did not look toward the people watching. He picked up Eleanor's teacup, checked that the lid was secure, and set it farther from the edge of the repaired table. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to, he told her. Eleanor studied his face. You still don't know who I am. I know you were hungry. Marla released a careful breath. Mr. Hayes, no one is denying that this situation could have been handled with greater sensitivity. But speculation about an old PIN does not change the payment requirement. She turned toward the point-of-sale station and gestured to the black meal scanner fixed beside the register. The system rejected her eligibility code. That is the only objective fact we have. Eleanor's hand moved toward the faded Whitmore Community Meal Fund cup. Beneath the newer price label, the old green code remained partly visible. Then test it again, she said. Marla's expression softened, almost kindly. I don't want to put you through further embarrassment. The embarrassment already happened. 3 short lines. Then the air shifted. The refrigerated case exhaled cold against the tile. The overhead vents rattled, and the scanner's green light blinked with the faint mechanical patience of something waiting to be trusted. Marla lifted the cup, entered the exposed digits, and held the code beneath the reader. A sharp tone sounded. Invalid appeared across the display in block letters. Several people looked away from Eleanor as if the word belonged to her rather than the machine. There, Marla said quietly. The program is inactive. A department administrator standing near the register stepped forward with a silver internal access card. Can I still charge mine to the executive account? Of course, Marla said. The administrator tapped the card. The scanner chimed once and approved the transaction immediately. Daniel looked at the machine. The network symbol in the upper corner showed no active connection. One gray bar flashed, vanished, then returned. Run hers again, he said. Marla turned. Excuse me? The fund code. It already failed. The executive card worked while the terminal is offline. The administrator lowered her coffee. Thomas moved closer to the counter. What does that mean? Marla answered first. Internal accounts may use cached authorization. Charity programs require live verification. It was plausible. Daniel nodded once. That could be true. Marla's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Then Daniel pointed toward the scanner's status light. But the connection light is cycling wrong. You cannot diagnose a system from a blinking light. Not the whole system. He set his toolbox on the floor beside the counter. Just the connection. Marla stepped between him and the terminal. Facilities. Does not have authorization to access point-of-sale equipment without an approved work order. Daniel stopped. He did not reach around her. He did not insist. Then request one. That could take hours. The woman you called ineligible is still sitting there. And no one is preventing her from leaving. The sentence landed harder than Marla intended. Eleanor's eyes dropped to the half piece of bread resting on the napkin in front of her. Thomas looked at Marla. Submit the request now. Director, opening the housing could compromise the device. Then IT can witness it. Marla's mouth formed the beginning of another explanation, but Thomas was already messaging his assistant. Within minutes, a young IT specialist named Aaron Price arrived carrying a sealed tool pouch and a tablet. He verified the terminal identification number, photographed the outer casing, and asked Daniel to explain what he had observed. Daniel kept his answer plain. Internal card approved offline. Community code failed. Status light suggests the charity verification line isn't communicating. Aaron checked the diagnostic screen. There are 2 pathways, he said. Internal accounts run through a local cache. External assistance codes require the network port. Marla folded her arms. Which confirms exactly what I said. Aaron looked at the screen again. It confirms the pathways. It does not explain why only one is down. He removed the security screws while Thomas watched. Daniel remained a step back, hands visible, saying nothing until the rear panel came free. Inside, the network cable had been folded sharply against the housing and held in that position by a white plastic tie. The bend was too clean to be accidental. Aaron touched the cable, then stopped. "Don't move it," Daniel said. "I wasn't going to. Photograph it first." Aaron glanced at him, then nodded. The tablet camera clicked. Daniel crouched beside the open unit without touching the wires. Years of repairing door sensors, call buttons, medication refrigerators, and emergency lights had taught him that damage spoke through shape. Accidental strain pulled. Edge cracked. Heat discolored. This cable had been bent, fixed, and hidden. Could it have happened during installation? Thomas asked. Daniel pointed to the dust line along the inner panel. The terminal's been here longer than the tie. Aaron leaned closer. The plastic was bright, unmarked, and newer than the gray dust around it. He's right. Marla's voice remained calm. A technician may have secured it during routine servicing. Daniel looked toward her. Which technician? I would have to review the records. You said earlier the camera might have been down for maintenance. I said recordings are routinely overwritten. You also said the program was discontinued years ago. Marla's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Mr. Hayes, please do not create connections that have not been established. Daniel looked back at the cable. I'm not creating one. He raised his phone, photographed the open housing from 3 angles, then included the terminal serial number and the cafeteria clock in a 4th image. I'm keeping the order straight. Thomas placed one hand flat on the counter. No one removes that tie. No one resets the terminal. No one clears the logs. Marla stepped closer to him. We can resolve this without alarming patients or implying misconduct where there may only be poor maintenance. Daniel did not defend himself. He looked at Aaron instead. Check whether the scanner recorded failed attempts locally. Aaron opened the audit menu. A list populated across the tablet. One failed code appeared, then another, then dozens. The cafeteria grew quiet enough that the ventilation system seemed suddenly loud. Aaron scrolled further. These are all assistance program transactions. How many? Thomas asked. Aaron's finger stopped at the bottom of the report. 143 in 6 weeks. Eleanor closed her eyes. Daniel looked toward the dining room, imagining 143 people standing where she had stood, each hearing a machine call them invalid while food sat inches away. Marla recovered first. That number does not establish intent. There may have been an expired database, incomplete applications, duplicate entries. Maybe, Daniel said. So we preserve everything. He stood and moved the half tray back toward Eleanor before the bread cooled completely. He did not hold the report up for the room to see. He did not turn Marla's fear into a public spectacle. Eat, he said softly. The machine doesn't get to decide whether you're hungry. Eleanor broke off a small piece, but before eating, she looked at the white tie inside the scanner. Her expression was no longer only recognition. It was grief. Thomas noticed. What is it? He asked. She answered without looking at him. That terminal was purchased with the meal fund. Aaron opened the user access log. The names tied to the disabled transactions were gone, erased from the visible record, but the system showed something worse. The charity pathway had not failed on its own. It had been manually placed in restricted mode from an administrative account. The audit log stopped on one line that refused to disappear from the screen. Charity pathway manually placed in restricted mode. No hardware failure. No network outage. No automatic error. Someone with administrative authority had changed it on purpose. Aaron Price slowly lowered the tablet onto the counter as though placing something fragile between everyone present. The ventilation system whispered through the ceiling. Somewhere behind them, a microwave chimed twice, but no one moved to open it. Thomas Whitmore stared at the audit screen without speaking. "Can you identify the account?" he finally asked. Aaron hesitated. "The visible username has been removed." Removed, not deleted completely. Hidden from standard audit view. Marla folded her hands together. "Director Whitmore, internal system records can become corrupted after software updates. We should avoid conclusions until enterprise IT reviews everything." Daniel looked at the screen instead of at her. If it was software corruption, it wouldn't know which name to hide. Aaron glanced toward Daniel. "He's right. Corruption damages data. This looks like intentional privilege masking." Marla answered too quickly. "That's only one interpretation." "Then preserve the evidence," Daniel replied quietly, "before anyone chooses another interpretation." 3 short sentences. Then silence stretched. Across the cafeteria, the refrigeration compressors hummed beneath the serving counter. Sunlight had begun pushing through the east windows, leaving long pale rectangles across the floor where patients, nurses, and visitors now stood without pretending not to watch. Thomas reached into his jacket and removed his executive identification badge. "Aaron," he said, "lock this terminal. Nobody accesses it without my authorization." Aaron immediately disconnected the tablet from the network and attached a temporary security seal across the terminal housing without disturbing the white cable Ty Daniel had photographed. Thomas watched every movement. Marla forced a polite smile. "That seems unnecessary for what is likely a technical misunderstanding." "Then preserving the original condition shouldn't concern you," Thomas answered. For the first time that morning, Marla had no immediate reply. Instead, she reached into her blazer pocket, removed her phone, looked at the screen, and quietly turned it face down against the counter before anyone could glimpse the notification. Daniel noticed the motion but said nothing. Eleanor noticed it too. She simply lowered her eyes to the paper cup still resting beside the untouched half of Daniel's breakfast. Her fingers traced the faded green letters beneath the newer sticker, as if remembering a promise someone had tried to bury beneath fresh ink. Aaron opened another diagnostic window. "There are archived synchronization logs stored locally," he said. "If the central server hasn't overwritten them, we may recover previous status changes." "Recover them," Thomas said. Aaron began typing. The keys produced soft, deliberate clicks that sounded unusually loud in the still cafeteria. One by one, archived records appeared. Date after date, week after week, every Monday morning, every Thursday afternoon. The charity pathway entered restricted mode for several hours before returning to normal. Daniel frowned. "Always during the busiest meal periods." Aaron nodded slowly. "Looks that way." Thomas leaned closer. "How many times?" Aaron counted silently. 23 separate activations over 6 weeks. Nobody spoke. 23 separate decisions. 143 rejected meals. This was no longer one unfortunate morning involving an elderly woman who lacked $2.17. It was a pattern. Daniel looked toward the dining room. An older veteran sitting near the window quietly folded his untouched napkin. A young mother bounced a restless toddler on her knee while pretending not to listen. None of them knew they had become part of a much larger story. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "How many people went home believing they weren't eligible?" she whispered. "When they were never given a chance." Thomas heard her. The question settled deeper than any accusation could have. Aaron opened another menu. Service activity. A second list appeared beside the audit logs. Daniel immediately recognized the format. It matched the maintenance records his department completed after every authorized repair. He leaned closer. "Those dates," he said softly. "Compare them." Aaron split the screen. The service log listed routine inspections of elevators, emergency lighting, generators, and HVAC equipment. Nothing referenced the cafeteria terminal. "No maintenance tickets," Aaron said. "Not one." Daniel nodded. which means nobody from facilities opened that housing. Thomas turned toward Daniel. Can you confirm that? Yes. How? Daniel reached into his toolbox and removed a small spiral notebook stained with grease and graphite. Every maintenance technician carried one. Inside, neat handwriting listed his daily assignments because elevators, electrical panels, and emergency exits rarely waited for computer systems to catch up. He turned several pages until he reached the previous month. The cafeteria wasn't assigned once. Aaron compared Daniel's handwritten entries against the digital maintenance schedule. Every date matched. Every signature matched. Every missing cafeteria repair matched. Marla looked away toward the serving line. Paper notes aren't official documentation. Daniel closed the notebook. That's why I didn't use them as proof. He nodded toward Aaron's screen. The official records already said the same thing. Thomas studied Daniel differently now. Not with admiration, with recognition. The maintenance technician never exaggerated what he knew. He only connected one documented fact to another. That restraint carried more weight than certainty. Aaron restored another archived file. Recovered surveillance index, he murmured. There are camera references attached to several restricted mode activations. Thomas looked up immediately. The cafeteria cameras? Yes. Aaron opened the file. Most clips had been flagged maintenance interruption. Daniel felt something tighten inside him. There wasn't maintenance. Aaron looked back toward him. That's what your logs show. Because that's what happened. Thomas crossed his arms slowly. Can those recordings be recovered? Aaron nodded carefully. Possibly. The index still exists. Someone only changed the category. Marla stepped forward for the first time in several minutes. Director Whitmore, with respect, we're now discussing internal security procedures in front of patients. This conversation belongs in an administrative office. Thomas did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the cafeteria. Elderly patients, nurses beginning their shifts, families holding breakfast trays, Daniel standing beside an open toolbox, Eleanor sitting quietly with half a piece of bread she still had not eaten, the repaired table, the paper cup, the silver oak pin hidden again beneath her coat. Every important piece of evidence remained exactly where ordinary people had witnessed it. No, Thomas said at last. This started here. Marla lowered her voice. Public perception could damage the hospital. Eleanor finally looked up. Truth doesn't damage a hospital, she said softly. Only the reasons people start hiding it. Thomas turned back toward Aaron. Recover every indexed recording. Preserve every log. Notify Enterprise IT that no files are to be altered. Aaron nodded. Immediately. Marla reached once more for her phone. This time Thomas noticed. Please leave it on the counter. She froze for half a second before slowly setting it back down. It was the smallest hesitation of the morning, but Daniel saw something inside it that no report could capture. For the first time, Marla was no longer thinking about explaining the evidence. She was thinking about who else might already know it existed. Aaron's tablet chimed again. A recovered financial summary had synchronized automatically with the archived logs. Every period when the charity pathway entered restricted mode matched another report submitted under the cafeteria's monthly performance metrics, showing lower charitable meal costs and improved budget efficiency. Thomas looked from the report to Marla, then back to the rows of rejected transactions. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that everyone leaned forward to hear it. This is no longer a cafeteria dispute. He closed the tablet himself. We're holding the next meeting here, in front of the people this affected. By late afternoon, the cafeteria no longer looked like a place designed for breakfast. The warming lights were off. The serving line had been closed behind steel shutters, and rows of chairs had been turned toward the same table where Marla had pulled Eleanor's tray away that morning. The repaired leg no longer rocked. The paper cup marked Whitmore Community Meal Fund sat beside the half-eaten bread, both sealed inside clear evidence bags but still visible beneath the fluorescent lights. Staff members stood along the walls. Patients and family members filled the chairs. At the back, Two hospital attorneys whispered over a folder, while a representative from Human Resources tested the microphone. Daniel entered through the side door carrying his old toolbox and the dented metal lunchbox he had never opened. He had changed nothing about himself. His blue-gray uniform was still creased at the elbows. A dark line of machine grease remained near one cuff, and exhaustion had settled beneath his eyes. Several administrators watched him as though he had crossed into a room where men dressed like him usually came only to repair something. Eleanor sat in the front row wearing the same beige coat. The silver oak pin remained hidden beneath her collar. Thomas stood near the darkened register with his arms at his sides, close enough to take control but silent enough to let every person decide what story they would tell when they believed control was still available. Marla arrived precisely on time with an attorney and a binder organized by colored tabs. She paused when she saw the evidence bags on the table. Then she smiled at the room. "Thank you all for your patience," she began. "This morning, a routine payment issue was unfortunately misunderstood and allowed to grow into something much larger." Her voice carried smoothly through the speakers. "No one was denied medical treatment. No patient was placed in danger. A cafeteria eligibility system experienced a technical interruption, and an employee outside the relevant department made assumptions before authorized personnel could review the facts." Several administrators nodded. The explanation was careful because most of it was technically true. Daniel was outside the cafeteria department. Eleanor had not been denied medical treatment. The terminal had experienced an interruption. Marla turned toward Daniel without sounding accusatory. Mr. Hayes was trying to be compassionate. But good intentions do not always produce accurate conclusions. A murmur moved through the room. For one moment, the weight shifted back toward her. Compassion could be framed as confusion. A maintenance worker could be framed as a well-meaning man who had wandered beyond his training. Even the rejected meal codes could become a software problem if the right person used the right words. Daniel did not reach for the microphone. He opened his toolbox, removed the tea-stained incident report, and placed it on the table. Thomas nodded to the technician controlling the overhead camera. The form appeared on the wall screen. "This was handed to me at 7:22, Daniel said. "It records the incident at 7:18. Marla opened her binder. "The form generator uses a server clock that may not have synchronized after last week's system update." It was a better explanation than the one she had offered that morning. The attorney beside her slid a printed IT notice across the table showing that several hospital devices had displayed incorrect time after maintenance. The room stirred again. An older man in the second row shook his head as though the mystery had already collapsed into ordinary technical failure. Daniel looked at the notice. "Which devices?" "That is not relevant to this individual event," Marla replied. "It is if the cafeteria terminal wasn't one of them." Aaron Price stepped forward from beside the wall. "It wasn't." The whispering stopped. He handed Thomas a certified system comparison. The register, cafeteria clock, security camera, and incident report terminal were synchronized to the same server. All four matched within 1 second. Thomas placed the report beneath the camera. The screen showed 4 identical time logs. Marla's attorney leaned toward her, but she raised one finger, asking him to wait. "Then the employee may have opened the form early as part of routine documentation," she said. "Preparing paperwork does not prove anyone intended to falsify an account." Once again, the explanation gave her room. It did not erase the pre-filled language, but it kept the first piece of evidence from closing around her. Daniel added the second item, his 4 photographs of the scanner housing. The cafeteria clock appeared in the background. The serial number was visible. The white plastic tie held the cable in a sharp bend. "This was the terminal when IT opened it," he said. "No one from facilities had serviced it." Marla turned a page in her binder. The cafeteria contracts with outside vendors. A vendor technician could have secured that cable. "Which vendor?" Daniel asked. "That is being reviewed." "Was there a service invoice?" "Not yet located." "A badge entry?" "Not all contractors enter through the same doors." "A work order?" Marla paused. only for a second. Records are not always perfect. The air conditioning clicked on above them. Papers lifted slightly along the edges. Daniel did not press harder. He placed his spiral service notebook beside the official digital maintenance records and allowed Aaron to explain that every internal visit required a ticket, every outside vendor required a temporary badge, and neither existed. Still, Marla held her ground. The absence of a record is not proof of deliberate interference, she said. No, Daniel answered. That's why we kept looking. He placed the audit summary on the table. 143 charity codes rejected during 23 restricted periods. Internal executive accounts continued working. The dates matched the cafeteria's strongest budget performance reports. A low sound moved through the patients seated near the aisle. Marla's face remained composed, but she reached for the water beside her and missed the glass on the first attempt. Those numbers are being presented without context, she said. Charitable programs are frequently misused. Some applicants submit expired codes. Some attempt duplicate meals. Some cannot verify eligibility. My responsibility was to prevent untracked losses that threaten services for everyone. For the first time, several department heads looked persuaded. Hospitals had budgets. Programs were abused. Financial controls could sound cruel when separated from the burden of keeping an institution open. Marla opened the binder to a chart showing rising food costs and falling reimbursements. If we had ignored these trends, she continued, staff hours would have been cut. Prices would have increased for patients' families. I made difficult decisions to protect the larger community. It was the strongest version of her story. Not greed, stewardship, not cruelty, responsibility. Daniel looked toward Eleanor before speaking. She held the arms of her chair, silent, allowing the room to see how easily harm could be dressed in professional language. Daniel turned back to Marla. Were the rejected people told their codes were under review? The system displayed their status. Were they given an appeal form? That process falls under patient services. Were their names referred to patient services? Marla's jaw tightened. The visible log no longer contains identifying information, because the names were hidden, because privacy controls may have removed them. Then why were the meals sold again? The room went still. Daniel placed 3 cafeteria receipts beneath the camera. Each showed food originally assigned to the community meal inventory being transferred minutes later to the paid service line. Aaron added the matching inventory codes. What had been described as waste prevention now appeared as food taken from an assistance program and sold at full price. Marla looked toward her attorney. Inventory reassignment is legal when subsidized meals go unclaimed. They weren't unclaimed, a woman's voice said from the third row. A patient in a green cardigan slowly stood. Daniel moved a chair closer before she had to remain on her feet. She held the back of it with both hands. I gave them my code, she said. The machine called it invalid. They told me to leave the line. Another man raised his hand. Then a nurse beside him. Then the older veteran near the window. Thomas watched the pattern become human. Daniel could have used the moment to turn the room against Marla. Instead, he adjusted the microphone so the woman in green could speak without raising her voice. Tell them only what you're comfortable telling, he said. Security Officer Cole Brennan stepped out from the wall. His face had gone pale. We were instructed to describe those cases as non-compliant guests, he said. That way they were treated as conduct issues, not service complaints. Marla's composure cracked at the edges. That is not an accurate description of my instruction. You told us not to create a complaint trail. I told you to avoid duplicate reports. You told me the exact phrase to use. Her attorney stood. This is becoming improper. Unverified recollections should not be treated as evidence. Thomas lifted one hand, and the attorney stopped. Aaron connected an archived audio file to the speakers. At first, there was only cafeteria noise. Trays sliding, a refrigerator door closing, a woman coughing near the register. Then Marla's voice emerged, lower than it was now but unmistakable. Label it maintenance. We don't need another complaint trail. No one moved. Even the ventilation seemed to recede. Marla stared at the speaker as though the sound had come from somewhere outside her own life. Thomas placed his signed performance report beside the recorder transcript. I approved the metrics that rewarded this, he said. That failure belongs to me. Eleanor finally rose. She did not remove the silver oak pin. Not yet. There is one document left, she said. Thomas looked toward the hospital's general counsel. The attorney carried a long archival envelope to the table, its paper yellowed at the edges, its seal marked with the original oak emblem. Daniel stepped back from the microphone. Marla looked at the envelope, and for the first time all day, fear replaced calculation in her face. The general counsel placed one finger beneath the unbroken seal and said, "This is the founding charter of Whitmore Memorial Hospital." The general counsel broke the seal beneath the old oak emblem and unfolded the founding charter across the evidence table. The paper made a dry, careful sound, louder than it should have been in a room filled with more than 100 people. A camera above the table projected the first page onto the cafeteria wall. At the bottom, beneath the hospital's original mission statement, a paragraph had been underlined in dark fountain ink. The Whitmore Community Meal Fund could not be suspended, redirected, or dissolved without a recorded public vote of the governing board and written notice to the founding trustees. Thomas looked toward the current board secretary. Was there ever such a vote? The woman opened the digital record on her laptop, then checked the bound minutes brought from legal storage. No. Any written notice? None. Any amendment to this clause? No, director. 3 answers. Then the room became still. The projector fan whispered against the wall. Somewhere near the back, a paper cup settled beneath someone's fingers with a soft crack, and the fluorescent lights revealed every crease in Marla's binder as her hand slowly loosened around it. The rule she had used to defend herself had not protected the hospital. It had placed her actions outside the hospital's own governing promise. The general counsel turned to the second page. There is more. Attached to the charter was a funding covenant renewed less than 3 years earlier. It required the hospital to maintain uninterrupted access to community meals and prohibited the resale of food allocated to the fund. Violation could trigger repayment demands, suspension of several private grants, and loss of eligibility for a federal nutrition partnership. Thomas looked at the financial summary already displayed beside the audit log. The money Marla had reported as savings was smaller than 1 month of the funding now at risk. How long has finance known about this covenant? He asked. A vice president seated along the wall shifted in his chair. A compliance notice arrived in April. Where is it? The man opened a folder with unsteady hands. Inside was a letter bearing the same oak seal. A red stamp across the top read action required. It had never been placed before the board. Marla turned toward him. That was not my department. But you received a copy, Thomas said. Aaron brought up the archived email header. Marla's address appeared beside the financial officers. The message had been opened twice. Once at 8:06 a.m. on the day it arrived. Again 3 weeks later, 1 day before the first charity restriction period appeared in the scanner log. Marla's attorney closed his eyes for a moment. Her binder slipped several inches across the table before she caught it. I believed the clause referred to the existence of the program, she said, her voice dry. The fund remained on the books. The food did not remain available, Thomas replied. Eligibility verification was unreliable, she said. We were trying to prevent fraud. Then why was the food sold? To avoid waste. And why were complaints relabeled? To prevent duplicate reporting. And why were the camera records marked as maintenance? Marla looked toward the speaker that had played her own voice. No answer came. The silence did not strike her like punishment. It closed around every explanation she had carefully built and left no space between what she claimed and what the evidence showed. Eleanor stood beside the evidence table. She removed the silver oak pin from inside her coat and fastened it where everyone could see it. The projector caught the small object in the light, and its shadow enlarged across the charter. Thomas's face changed before anyone else understood. The uncertainty he had carried since morning was gone. What remained was grief. "The archive confirmed the issue record," he said. Into the microphone. "Pin 01, 1958 was made for the hospital's founder." Eleanor placed one hand on the charter. The handkerchief marked EW remained folded around her other palm. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore," she said. "I signed this charter with my husband when this hospital was still one brick building, 12 nurses, and a borrowed kitchen." No one gasped. The truth was too heavy for that. A chair creaked beneath someone who had stopped breathing normally. Patricia Lane, the older nurse, covered her mouth. Cole Brennan lowered his eyes. Thomas stood only a few feet from Eleanor, but for a moment he seemed much farther away. "She is my mother," he said. The words passed through the cafeteria without applause. Eleanor looked at him, then at the line of patients who had testified. "That is not the important part." She reached into the evidence bag only after the general counsel opened it and withdrew the sealed tray. One half of Daniel's breakfast remained beneath the transparent cover, flattened slightly where her fingers had held it that morning. She raised it no higher than her chest. "This man did not know my name," she said. "He did not know what I founded. He did not know whether anyone with power was watching." Daniel stood beside his toolbox, his hands resting loosely at his sides. He did not look toward the cameras. He looked at Eleanor as he had when she was only an elderly woman trying not to let a cup of tea reveal how badly her hands were shaking. "He was hungry," Eleanor continued. His son had asked him to eat. Still, he divided what he had because a stranger was being told that hunger had made her unworthy of a chair. The screen behind her showed the morning footage without sound. Marla pulling the tray back. Daniel separating the two pieces of bread, his hand moving one half across the table. Thomas standing at the far end of the room. Every part of the title's promise existed now as fact, not sentiment. The hospital director had stood because he saw the oak pin, but the founder had stayed because she saw Daniel's character. Eleanor placed the bread back on the tray. The poorest man in this room was the only one who remembered that hunger is not a character flaw. The silence deepened. The projector fan turned. An elevator bell rang in the lobby beyond the glass doors. Someone's phone vibrated against a chair and was quickly silenced. Marla's pen slipped from her fingers, struck the tile, and rolled beneath the table Daniel had repaired. He bent automatically, picked it up, and placed it beside her binder. There was no triumph in the gesture, only habit. Marla stared at the pen. "Why would you do that?" she asked, so quietly the microphone barely caught it. Daniel straightened. "Because evidence should decide what happens next, not humiliation." Thomas took the microphone. "Effective immediately, all restrictions on the Whitmore Community Meal Fund are suspended. The scanner and financial records remain sealed for independent review. Every rejected transaction will be reconstructed. Every affected patient or visitor will be contacted privately, reimbursed where appropriate, and offered a formal correction of any conduct record created from these incidents." He looked toward Cole. "The term non-compliant guest is removed from cafeteria reporting today." Cole nodded. Thomas continued. "Marla Voss is relieved of operational authority pending investigation. No employee is authorized to delete, alter, or privately negotiate any record connected to this matter. The board will convene publicly within 72 hours. The audit will include executive oversight, including my own signatures." That last sentence changed the room again. Thomas was not offering Marla as a single sacrifice for a system he had approved from a distance. He placed his own authority inside the investigation. Eleanor watched him carefully. "And the people who need breakfast tomorrow?" she asked. Thomas turned toward the cafeteria doors. "An emergency meal station will open before the first shift. No public explanation of hardship. No separate line. No label identifying anyone as charity." The woman in the green cardigan lowered her head and began to cry without sound. Daniel moved a box of tissues within her reach, then stepped away so she would not have to accept comfort under everyone's gaze. Eleanor looked toward the board. "Members, Independent patient representation will be part of the oversight committee. So will nursing, community services, and frontline staff. Her eyes settled on Daniel. Including facilities. Daniel's shoulders tightened slightly. It was the first moment all day when he seemed uncomfortable. Recognition was harder for him to carry than blame. Marla remained seated, staring at the oak seal projected above her. She had not been shouted down. No one laughed at her. The evidence had done something more final than ridicule. It had removed every safe place for the lie to stand. Eleanor turned toward Thomas. "This is where justice begins," she said, "not where responsibility ends." Then she looked at Daniel, the man whose last breakfast had become the first honest record the hospital could no longer erase. Power, gratitude, and public recognition had all arrived at his feet at once, and the entire room waited to see what a quiet man would choose to do with them.